Hi everyone, I'm gonna slowly draw us back from our short 5-minute break. Welcome back to Housing as Feminist Issue. And the second set of presentations will be from Ubuntu Women's Shelter and from Kirstine Patton. I'm gonna just read a bio for Ubuntu Women's Shelter's speakers, who are Kashfi, Ahmed and Loa Mirza. Ubuntu Women's Shelter is a specialist by and for organisation based in Glasgow that supports migrant women and non-binary people with no recourse to public funds. Our name is derived from the Nguni Bantu term, meaning I am because we are. And we use the word shelter as a verb, thus no apostrophe. We manage an office and a shelter called Sean's House as safe spaces to accommodate people whose needs are not being met by state agencies and existing non-specialist charities. Our service provision includes accommodation, casework, advocacy, outreach, and wellbeing support. And to note, we are sex worker friendly and trans inclusive. I'm just going to add that there's really fantastic conversation that Ubuntu, Life Support, myself, and the artist Alberta Whistle had that's in the life support guide. Please check it out. And so I'm going to hand over to Kashfi and Loa.
Great, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, let me know if you see it. It's not coming up, is it? Okay, there we are. Great, you can see that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So my name is Loa and I am the Wellbeing Development Worker at Ubuntu Women's Shelter.
Hi everyone, my name is Kashfi and I'm the Vogue Violence Against Women and Girls Advocate at Ubuntu.
We just wanted to start off by giving a slight trigger warning, as we will be talking about sexual violence throughout this presentation.
So today I am going to share an original poem written by me. So again, trigger warning, there will be sexual violence mentioned in it. So here it goes. You don't get to have me. You don't get to have me. You failed to protect me from the monsters living inside, the dwelling with the headless Barbies and the puffy pink elephant that stood witness to the silent nightly terrors that took place on a single bed with the silver frame. You don't get to have me. When I unlocked the door, he came and grabbed me, rammed his tongue down my throat. I left the dwelling only to return when I knew for sure my parents would be home. You don't get to have me. The public library, the pictures with dolphins dancing and splashing in glee became my refuge. I never dared to return home after school with an empty stomach. I rushed straight to where lay the colorful books hiding in the nooks and crannies. You don't get to have me. Home is meant to be a safe space. You entertain those monsters instead. Society, relations, culture, and pretending all mattered more than protecting me. You don't get to have me. So this poem, sort of a background story of understanding how violence affects feeling safe and being at home. So I'm going to pass it on to Loa.
Thank you for sharing that, Kashfi. So before we begin, I wanted to give a bit of context about who we are and what we do. So as Nat mentioned, we are a specialist by and for organisation that supports Black and minoritized women and non-binary people with no recourse to public funds. So no recourse to public funds, or as I'm going to be referring to it, NRPF, it is a condition that is imposed on a variety of people who are subject to immigration control. So such people would be folks on student visas, spousal visas, asylum seekers, refused asylum seekers with their appeal rights exhausted, and visa overstayers. Now, what the NRPF condition does is it bars people with such limited leave to enter or limited leave to remain from accessing certain benefits. So such benefits would be child tax benefits, disability allowances, but in particular to this sort of topic today, it bars people from accessing homelessness assistance and housing benefits. Now, I wanted to pull in the current Nationality and Borders Bill that is being passed through the House of Commons, and we very much think it will pass through the House of Lords very soon, is that there will be a lot more people with NRPF. And one of the core reasons for that is that they are planning on splitting people up into two groups. You've got Group 1 refugees and Group 2 refugees. Now, Group 1 refugees would be those who have come directly from the country that they're fleeing or their country of origin. They have presented themselves to the authorities immediately without delay. They took a more legal route, and if they took an unlawful one, they would have they are allowed to evidence, or they can evidence their good cause for their unlawful entry. But obviously the threshold would be very high. Now we have the Group 2 refugees, who is basically anyone who doesn't meet the criteria of Group 1, which is actually majority of the people that we work with. And what the consequence of that is going to be is that they'll have a more limited time period. So they'll get, we assume, about 30 months leave. They'll be regularly assessed at sort of regular intervals for removal, and they will have no recourse to public funds. So what we're preparing for in the sector is seeing an increase of people with NRPF. Now, Ubuntu Women's Shelter was born out of a need for emergency accommodation for migrant women with NRPF. There was a men's shelter that was set up in Glasgow and has been running for quite a few years, but there was no equivalent for women. Furthermore, there's also a lack of specialist accommodation services, and most of the women that we support wouldn't fall under the remit of mainstream women's refuges because of their irregular immigration status. So through fundraising and through private donors, we were able to purchase our shelter, which we've called Sean's Home, and that is where we house up to 2 women at a time for short-term stays, but because of COVID, we've seen a sort of longer-term stay for some folks. Now, I want to talk a little bit about enforced destitution, because that's a really core component of all of this. So McElwain and colleagues from Safety for Sisters wrote a report, and in that they had stated that there are 4 Ds that migrant women are at increased risk of facing. So the first one is disbelief, then we have destitution, detention, and deportation. So I want to focus specifically on destitution because of the sort of limited time period that we have. So the Joseph Rowntree Foundation have defined destitution as anyone who has lacked 2 or more essential items. So these items would be housing, heating, food, clothing, basic toiletries. Now, it's important to note that the Home Office is very strategic and very intentional. So they enforce destitution institutionally as a means to incentivize voluntary returns. However, as we know, this is not an option for people, nor should it be. So what that does do is it leaves women with very, very few choices, or rather an illusion of choice. Either it's a voluntary return, it's staying with the perpetrator, or it's homelessness. And all of these so-called options increase their risk of sexual violence, sexual exploitation, domestic violence, or rape. Now, many third sector organizations have made that link quite clearly between violence against women and girls and these 4 Ds. Thus, there's a lot of evidence that's being collated about the increased risk of violence that women from Black and minoritized and migrant backgrounds face. I do recommend reading some of the reports by Safety for Sisters or IMCAN. I'll link that below in the chat, but they've got a lot of great resources there.
So as Loa mentioned about, violence against women and barriers to housing, I wanted to sort of delve into it a little bit further. So one of the things that we have often come across and when working with our service users is lack of access to criminal justice system. So if a woman is in a domestic violence or violent situation and wanted to prosecute somebody because of their immigration status or lack thereof, or ambiguous immigration status, etc., as Loa mentioned, it would be quite difficult for them to access a criminal justice system because you cannot be unidentified and stuff. You need to state your name and give identifying information, so it's not protected. So even that includes forced marriage protection order, even civil orders of such nature, which falls under the honor-based violence category. And then you have the aspect of Black and minoritized women are invisibilized when seeking criminal justice due to lack of status, fear of deportation, fear of being separated from their children. So often perpetrators and partners often with threaten that, oh, you will lose your child and access to certain your children, or access to shelter and protection if you leave, or if you go to the police and things like that. And also, oh, you'll be deported. So certain fear is easily provoked on women that we work with. Then there's also the aspect of law enforcement authorities cannot be trusted to protect women and help them out in any abuse situation, whether it be domestic, sexual, honor-based, etc., without reporting it to home office. So we cannot necessarily get the guarantee. So if somebody is in a violent situation, when we do get a phone call, we're not able to often access law enforcement to help women out of that situation, in a quite dangerous situation as well, without putting them in jeopardy and danger. And so these are some of the barriers to housing that we speak about primarily. And that keeps women with their perpetrators and in those difficult situations. So I just wanted to touch upon human trafficking. One of the things that you can see that's written over there is like, I wanted to talk about the Human Trafficking Exploitation Scotland Act in 2015, and it's a regulation recognizes the links and the competencies setting out by the criminal offense of human trafficking, as well as the presumption against prosecution of victims of human trafficking. So there are legislative orders in place in Scotland, to protect survivors of human trafficking, etc. But the reality with housing survivors of human trafficking is another story. As you can read, this was published by a Red Cross report, as published in Just Right Scotland, is there have been many detailed reports over several years raising concerns about poor quality, unsanitary, and in some cases unsafe accommodation provided to people seeking asylum, among other serious issues. These reports have described, vermin-infested accommodations, ceiling falling in, pregnant women struggling to access healthcare, and survivors of torture and human trafficking being forced to share a bedroom with strangers. So different types of people, whether it's asylum seekers, human trafficking victims, what you're seeing the theme, and again and again, is the deterrence from seeking justice, the deterrence from going to seek, proper housing, proper care, in fear of being deported, in fear of being persecuted, in fear, there's that whole perpetual thing that we're seeing when we are trying to get women who are subject to violence proper support and care and protection and safety. So yeah, that is all for us, and these are our references. So thank you.
Wow, thank you. So on time. It's really exquisite. Thank you so much for that really insightful and also quite heavy and also really beautiful presentation and poem, especially. Thank you, Kashfi. There's so many links that are already coming up around what's the state's role in care or in provision, even on a really basic level, that I feel like is being linked together today already. So we'll come back to that after Christine